Damn it, Daniels, what's going on here? Sergeant Adams barked, his face twisted in frustration. He was leaning against the hood of his cruiser, his arms crossed in disbelief. You're not thinking clearly. Daniels swallowed. This guy, his dangerous sergeant, is just standing there, staring like he's waiting for something. I don't trust him. Adams ran a hand through his hair. I've been doing this for 20 years, Daniels. You're telling me you're gonna arrest someone based on a gut feeling. But Daniels had seen something that wasn't sitting right with him, something in the way the man on the corner stood. Too still, too purposeful. He knew the guy wasn't a regular on these streets. His presence was wrong, and Daniels wasn't about to let it go. The man, a black man dressed in a crisp suit, didn't move when the officers approached. His dark eyes flicked over them, but his expression never changed. A slight tilt of his head was all it took to make Daniels feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Sir, we need you to come with us," Daniels said, trying to sound calm, though his voice wavered. The man didn't respond immediately. He looked to the sky, as if deciding whether or not to even entertain the officer. His voice finally broke the tense silence. "I'm not going anywhere with you." A cold shiver ran down Daniels' spine, but he steeled himself. "You don't have a choice." As he reached for his handcuffs, everything happened in the blink of an eye. The man's hand shot up like a lightning strike, knocking the officer's wrist away, and in one fluid motion, he spun around, driving his elbow into Daniels' side. Daniels stumbled, pain searing through his ribs. Before he could react, the man slammed him to the ground, pinning him with unexpected strength. "Get off him!" shouted Adams. But before he could make a move, the man's eyes locked onto him. There was something in those eyes, cold, calculating, and absolutely sure of what was happening. "You don't want to do this," the man said, his voice low but dripping with authority. Adams hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and that was all it took. Without warning, the man twisted his body, and in one swift movement, his hand shot out, grabbing Adams by the throat. The officer gasped for air, his hands scrabbling to break free. "Let him go!" Daniels yelled, scrambling to his feet. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is gonna get worse for you." The man's lips twitched into something that could have been a smirk, except it was nothing like a smile. It was something darker, something Daniels couldn't understand. And then, just like that, the man let Adams go and stepped back, looking around at the officers with quiet menace. Daniels staggered to his feet, his heart still racing. He could barely process what had just happened. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary citizen. The crowd gathered at the corner, whispering, watching, some recording the scene. Daniels, still gasping for breath, wiped his mouth and tried to steady his shaking hands. "I don't know who you are," Daniels said through gritted teeth, "but you're under arrest." But the man simply stood there, eyes never leaving Daniels's, waiting. And then the twist, something that no one saw coming. With a sound like an explosion, the man's suit jacket seemed to melt into nothingness, revealing a sleek black vest. A small device blinked on his wrist. And just like that, the world seemed to change. There was a flash of light, and everything froze in place. Before Daniels could shout for backup, before Adams could even raise his weapon, everything around them shifted. The police cruisers, the street, the flashing lights, it all disappeared. No one moved, and in the dead silence that followed, the man's voice cut through the air. "Listen carefully, Officer Daniels. This isn't what you think it is. I'm not your enemy." His words hung heavy in the air. Everyone was frozen in place, trapped in some kind of strange stasis. And all Daniels could do was stare at him, mouth open, the weight of confusion and fear clawing at his chest. "Who the hell are you?" Daniels finally managed to croak. The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered to the sky, then back at the officer. "You about to find out." The stillness was suffocating. Time itself had come to a standstill, and for what felt like eternity, Daniels couldn't shake the sensation that the universe had frozen just for him. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, loud and erratic. Sweat dripped down the back of his neck, and his fingers twitched, an instinctive reaction to his inability to move. Adams, still gasping for air, was now frozen mid-motion, his hand inches from his throat, eyes wide in panic. Daniels tried to yell again, but nothing came out. His lips moved, but no sound reached his ears. The strange figure, still standing perfectly composed, had done something. He didn't know what, and all the laws of reality had been suspended in a heartbeat. For a moment, Daniels thought he might be dreaming. But no, the pain in his ribs, the ache of the earlier hit, was far too real. Then, as quickly as it had happened, the man's wrist device blinked again, and the freezing spell released. The world came rushing back to life. Daniels stumbled, gasping for air, as Adams dropped to the ground, his knees buckling under him. He was pale, shaking, but alive. The crowd had dispersed in a flurry of noise, people yelling at each other, running off into the night. The man didn't move. He simply stood there, his face impassive. There was no sign of the chaos he had just instigated. He was calm, too calm. What the hell did you just do? Daniels gasped, his breath ragged. The man looked at him, his expression unreadable. You should have let me explain earlier. Daniels clenched his fists, still dizzy from the shock. Explain? You just attacked an officer. You're gonna pay for this. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm not your enemy, the man repeated, his voice unshaken. If I were, you'd already be dead. Then what the hell do you want? Daniels snapped, his confusion turning into frustration. The man glanced over at the now distant city lights. I need to make sure something happens tonight. Something bigger than you or I. You think I'm just going to let you walk away after this? Daniels said, reaching for his radio, but his fingers couldn't seem to find the button. He was trembling now, the adrenaline from the earlier confrontation still coursing through his veins. I know you're scared, the man said. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you from something much worse. But you're running out of time. Daniels didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or had he stumbled into a nightmare that wasn't his own? Protect us from what? Who are you? Daniels demanded, his voice trembling. The man's gaze softened, just for a moment. You'll understand soon enough. But not if I'm arrested. There it was again, the cryptic words. And Daniels could feel it, deep down. The man wasn't just some thug. No ordinary criminal could move like that, could command the situation with that kind of quiet authority. But what was he? And why'd he targeted him? Are you CIA? Daniels asked, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. The man raised an eyebrow, a faint smile curving his lips, but it wasn't warm. I'm a lot of things. But right now, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Daniels froze, the weight of the situation sinking in. He was completely out of his depth. Let's get something straight, the man continued. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for your cooperation. Because if I don't get what I need, millions of people will suffer. And that includes you. Daniels shook his head. This is insane. You've got to be lying. I don't lie, the man said simply. I don't have time for that. There was something about the man's eyes, the way they gleamed with a quiet, painful truth, that made Daniels pause. It was almost as if the man wasn't trying to convince him so much as he was speaking to him from a place of raw urgency. Who else is involved in this? Daniels asked, his voice shaking. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, and Daniels instinctively backed up, not sure what to expect. But the man didn't make a move. He just looked at him with that same, unreadable expression. You won't get any answers from me. Not tonight, the man said, his voice tight. But if you want to stop what's coming, you'll need to trust me. Trust you? Daniels scoffed. You almost killed Adams back there. What kind of trust are you talking about? Trust, the man repeated, his eyes flashing with a hard intensity. Not faith. Trust. You'll need to make a choice soon, Daniels. But you can't make it alone. Not if you want to live. A chill ran through Daniels. He didn't know what was happening, but it was clear, whatever this was, it wasn't going to end tonight. And he wasn't sure whether that terrified him more or less. Daniels opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of distant sirens pulled his attention. More officers were coming. It wouldn't be long before reinforcements showed up. His time was running out. Before he could make a move, the man turned and took a step back, his voice cutting through the night. "You don't have much time, Daniels. The choice will be yours soon enough." The man's figure dissolved into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Daniels standing there, stunned, on the edge of a cliff he didn't even know he was standing on. And as the sirens grew louder, something gnawed at him, a deep, primal fear that everything was about to change. But what if the man was telling the truth? What if there really was something bigger than any of them that was coming? Daniels didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain. He was already caught in something much bigger than he could ever have imagined. Daniels stood there, motionless, his mind racing to make sense of the chaos that had just unfolded. The flashing lights of the approaching squad cars cut through the night like a strobe, too bright for the confusion still clouding his thoughts. He wanted to move, to act, but something held him there, an invisible force locking his legs to the pavement. He could still feel the man's presence, even though he was gone. The calm assurance in his voice, the way his body had moved with an almost unnatural precision, all of it lingered. Daniels looked down at his hands, still trembling from the encounter. It was as if the entire world had shifted, and he hadn't been able to follow. "Daniels!" Adams's voice broke through the haze, sharp and panicked. The officer was on his knees now, gasping for breath as if the weight of what had happened was only beginning to settle on him. His eyes were wide, unfocused. What the hell was that? Who was that guy? What just happened? Daniels didn't answer immediately. He didn't have the answers. Hell, he barely knew what to think. The only thing he did know was that the man in the suit wasn't some street thug or criminal. He wasn't even a suspect. He was something else. But the idea that he could be some kind of government agent, CIA, maybe, felt even more surreal than everything else. The sound of tires screeching interrupted his thoughts. Reinforcements had arrived. Several cruisers came to a halt, doors slamming as officers poured out. Daniels took a deep breath and turned to face them. Sergeant Adams scrambled to his feet, his voice shaky. "You won't believe it, Chief. You won't believe what just happened." "Daniels, what's going on here?" Chief Marshal, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, walked toward them, scanning the area with a sense of authority. His eyes locked onto Daniels, waiting for an explanation. Daniels swallowed hard. His mind raced, but he couldn't get the words out. The truth, what he had just seen, felt impossible to explain. How could he tell them about the man who had paralyzed time itself, who had turned a simple street corner into a battlefield of wills? How could he describe the feeling of utter helplessness when the world froze around him? I don't know, Chief," Daniels muttered, his voice distant. "I don't know." Marshall's gaze turned steely, then shifted toward the crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk, murmuring in confusion. Several of them had their phones out, recording, but none of them had seen the same thing Daniels had. To them, it had been just another altercation between the police and a suspect, except this one had escalated faster than anyone could comprehend. "Get control of this situation," Daniels, Marshall ordered. "I want statements from everyone who witnessed this, and you better figure out what that was. Fast." Daniels nodded, though his mind was miles away. Adam stepped up beside him, his face pale. "Daniels, I've been in this job too long to be scared of people. But that guy? Something's off. He wasn't human, not in the way we know it." Daniels didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the empty street corner where the man had stood moments ago. The air around him still felt thick with the echo of what had happened. "I don't know what he is," Daniels finally said, his voice tight. "But he's not just some criminal. He's something else." "You think he's CIA?" Adams asked, his voice rising with disbelief. "Maybe," Daniels said quietly, his brow furrowing. "But I don't think the CIA would be so careless. There's something else going on. Something we're not seeing." The officers were already starting to take control of the scene, questioning witnesses and making sure everything was documented. But Daniels wasn't paying attention to them. His mind kept circling back to that moment. The man's eyes, the freezing of time, the cold assurance that this was all bigger than anything he could understand. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life, breaking the tension that had settled over the scene. "Daniels, you there?" The voice on the other end was frantic. It was Officer Harris from dispatch. "Yeah, I'm here," Daniels replied, his voice clipped. "You need to get back to the precinct. We've got something you need to see. Something big. It's about that guy." Daniels' heart skipped a beat. "What about him?" "You won't believe it. We just got word. He's been flagged. High-level intel. You need to get here now." The words hit Daniels like a punch to the gut. He turned to Adams, his face pale. "We need to go. Now." Adams didn't need to ask why. He was already on his way to the cruiser. "I'll drive." As they sped through the city streets, the weight of what Daniels had just heard pressed on him. High-level intel. The phrase echoed in his mind. It meant only one thing. The man wasn't just a rogue agent or a criminal. He was connected to something much bigger, something far more dangerous than Daniels could have imagined. By the time they reached the precinct, the atmosphere inside was tense. Officers were gathered in small groups, whispering, while others typed furiously on their computers, searching for information. Daniels' chest tightened as he walked past them, heading toward the back offices. Chief Marshal was waiting for him, his face grim. "Daniels, this is bigger than we thought." "I know," Daniels replied, his voice hollow. Harris said he's flagged. "CIA." Marshall nodded, his hands clasped in front of him. "It's not just the CIA. It's international. This man, his name is Elias Blackwell. He's been working off the books for years, deep in the shadows. And every agency has been looking for him." "Why?" Daniels asked. "What's he doing? What does he want?" Marshall's gaze darkened. "He's a ghost, a legend in the world of intelligence. They say he's the one who made the impossible possible, but no one really knows what he's after." Daniels shook his head, his thoughts racing. "What the hell do you mean, made the impossible possible?" Marshall's jaw clenched. "It means Elias Blackwell is part of something far beyond any agency or government. And now, somehow, he's in our city." Daniels swallowed. His world had just turned upside down. "He's not a criminal, is he?" Daniels asked softly. Marshall looked at him, a deep weariness in his eyes. "I don't know anymore, but I'm betting everything on the fact that you're going to have to choose a side soon enough. And that's the part you won't be ready for." Daniels' stomach dropped. The silence in the precinct was suffocating. Daniels sat at his desk, his hands shaking as he reviewed the information the chief had provided. But no matter how many times he looked over the files, the details didn't add up. Elias Blackwell, this ghost, this legend, had somehow slipped through the cracks of every major intelligence agency in the world, and now he was in the middle of the city, causing chaos. Daniels didn't know what to make of it all. The more he learned, the less he understood. The stories about Blackwell, his alleged abilities to manipulate technology, to disappear without a trace, to influence people and events without them even knowing it, seemed like something out of a spy novel. But everything about tonight, everything he'd seen with his own eyes, made it clear. This wasn't fiction. And yet, Daniels couldn't shake the nagging question. Why him? Why had Blackwell targeted him? His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he read the briefing again. According to the report, Blackwell had been flagged by multiple agencies over the years, each with its own file, but none had ever gotten close enough to capture him. The files were filled with incomplete information, cryptic notes, and dead ends. There was no direct connection to any organization or government. It was as if he existed outside of the normal laws of the world. "Daniels," a voice broke through his thoughts. Daniels looked up to find Sergeant Adams standing in the doorway, his face etched with concern. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot, but it was the look of confusion and fear in them that caught Daniels' attention. "You all right?" Adams asked, his tone softer than usual. Daniels rubbed his eyes, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. "I don't know, Adams. I don't know what the hell's going on." Adams stepped into the room, glancing over the papers spread out on Daniels' desk. "This doesn't make sense, does it? The guy almost killed me, and now we're talking about him being some kind of international agent, off the grid for years. I can't wrap my head around it." Daniels let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Neither can I. but everything points to him being way above our pay grade. I can't even figure out where to start with this. Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone, Adams said, his voice a little more hesitant. Maybe we can get someone else involved. Someone who knows more about this kind of thing. Daniels shook his head. Who? The CIA? We've already seen how that's working out. No one's been able to touch him for years. Adams frowned, then seemed to reconsider. I get it, but we're just two beat cops, Daniels. You're way in over your head. We don't have the resources, the training, any of it. The words stung more than Daniels cared to admit. He wasn't used to feeling out of his depth, especially in his own city. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized Adams was right. They were in over their heads. No one knew where Blackwell came from or what he wanted, but the longer they kept pressing, the more dangerous it became. You're right, Daniels muttered, standing up from his desk and pushing the papers aside. We need help, but we're not going to get any from the usual channels. Adams eyed him carefully. What are you thinking? Daniels exhaled slowly. I'm thinking we need to go straight to the source. Whoever Blackwell's working for, or whoever's after him, might be the key to understanding this mess. But we can't rely on the CIA or any of these people. We need someone who isn't tied to the bureaucracy. Someone who knows what Blackwell is capable of. Who would that be? Adams asked cautiously. Daniels didn't answer immediately. Instead, his thoughts drifted back to the moment in the alley, when Blackwell's eyes had locked onto his. There had been something there, a flicker of recognition, almost as if Blackwell had been watching him for longer than that moment. And then Daniels remembered something else, the device on Blackwell's wrist. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen. No military tech, no civilian gadget. It was something more, something designed to manipulate time. He stared at Adams, a single thought creeping into his mind. There's one person who might know about this, Daniels said quietly. One person who might understand this technology. Adams raised an eyebrow. Who? Daniels hesitated, his gut turning. A former colleague. Her name's Rachel Thompson. She used to work in R&D for the military. We were close back in the day, before she went rogue. Adams blinked, surprised. Rogue? What do you mean? Daniels' jaw tightened. She's a genius, top of her class. But the military, they couldn't keep her on the leash. She was too smart, too independent. She left a few years ago and disappeared off the grid. I have no idea where she is now. But if anyone can help us understand Blackwell's technology, it's her. That sounds risky, Adams said slowly. You sure she's not just some conspiracy nut? She's not, Daniels said firmly. She's the real deal. But she won't come easy. We'll need to find her, and when we do, we'll have to convince her we're not just a couple of cops out of our league. Adams crossed his arms, a thoughtful expression on his face. So, we track down a genius who's gone rogue, and she helps us figure out why a ghost is walking around with some kind of time-warping device. That's the plan. Daniels nodded. That's the only plan we have. And if we don't move fast, we'll never catch Blackwell. The urgency in Daniels' voice was unmistakable. They were running out of time. If they didn't figure this out soon, Blackwell would be long gone, and whatever he was planning would unfold without them. Adams sighed, clearly not thrilled by the idea, but nodded in agreement. All right, let's find Rachel. As they stepped out of the precinct and into the cool night air, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. But there was no turning back now. They had made their choice. The city felt different that night, hushed, tense, like it was holding its breath. The neon lights from the bars on the corner flickered faintly in the distance, casting long shadows along the empty streets. Daniels' mind raced with the weight of the task ahead. Finding Rachel Thompson wasn't going to be easy, and even if they did find her, they'd have to convince her to trust them. Trust wasn't something she gave freely, especially not after everything that had happened with the military. Do you have any idea where she's been hiding? Adams asked, his voice low as they walked toward the parked cruiser. He'd been quieter than usual, his thoughts likely swirling just as Daniels' were. Daniels shook his head. I haven't heard from her in years. The last I knew, she was operating somewhere in the Midwest. But that's a long shot. She's good at covering her tracks. We'll have to start with her old contacts, if they are even still around. Adams slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine. The headlights sliced through the darkness as he pulled out into the street, following Daniels' directions. The streets passed by in a blur, but Daniels couldn't stop his thoughts from circling back to Blackwell. Every time he replayed that moment in the alley, it felt like his heart was beating faster, as though the danger was still close, looming just behind him. "What do you think Blackwell's after?" Adams asked, breaking the silence again. Daniels hesitated, eyes glued to the dark road ahead. "I don't know, but I'm sure whatever it is, it's big. Something that could change everything if it's got that kind of technology." Adams didn't reply. The unspoken fear between them was palpable, fear that they were chasing something that neither of them could fully comprehend. After what felt like hours, they reached the outskirts of the city. There, in the shadows of old warehouses and abandoned buildings, was the kind of place that seemed perfect for hiding away from the world. Daniels' heart began to pound as they pulled up in front of an unmarked building. "Her old contact," Daniels muttered under his breath, barely able to get the words out. "We'll check with him, see if he knows anything about her." They parked the car and approached the building. The area was silent, save for the occasional distant sound of cars driving past. The door to the building was half open, the flickering light inside casting an eerie glow on the pavement. Daniels paused for a moment, scanning the area. The haze on the back of his neck stood up, but he pushed the feeling aside. Adams, more cautious than Daniels, kept his hand near his holstered gun as they entered. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with old tools and boxes long forgotten. The faint hum of electricity buzzed overhead as they stepped deeper into the building. At the far end, a figure moved in the shadows, a man sitting at a workbench, fiddling with something mechanical. "You've got a visitor." "Oh," Daniels called out, his voice loud enough to break the silence but careful enough not to startle the man. The figure stopped and turned toward them. "Oh," an old informant who'd once worked closely with Rachel, squinted in the dim light. He was a wiry man, hair graying at the temples, his face weathered from years of running jobs and hiding out from the law. His eyes locked onto Daniels with a mix of recognition and wariness. "You still breathing, Daniels?" Ol asked, his voice gruff, but there was an underlying amusement in it. "I'm alive," Daniels said, stepping closer. "We need to talk about Rachel." Ol's expression shifted instantly. The amusement faded, replaced by something darker. "What about her?" Daniels studied him carefully, his tones softening. "We need to find her. It's urgent. Something's happened, and we need her help." Ol set down what he was working on, his eyes narrowing. "I haven't heard from her in months. And last I checked, she doesn't take kindly to anyone looking for her." "I know," Daniels said, "but we don't have a choice. She's the only one who can help us." Ol hesitated for a moment, chewing on his lip before sighing. "You really think she's gonna help you after all this time?" "She's gonna have to," Adams cut in, his voice flat. "People's lives are at risk, and we can't figure this out alone." Ol stared at them for a long moment, then glanced around the room. Finally, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Last I heard, she was in a place called the Hollow. Small town. Off the grid. Not even the locals know much about it." Daniels took the paper from him, his pulse quickening. "The Hollow." Ol nodded. "She's been hiding out there for the past few months. Word is, she's working on something big." "Thank you," Daniels said, pocketing the paper. "We'll find her." Ol watched them with a knowing look as they turned to leave. "Just be careful, Daniels. Rachel isn't the same person she was when you worked together. Whatever she's involved in now, it's deep." "I know," Daniels replied, his voice firm but uncertain. "I know." They didn't speak again as they left the building and got back into the cruiser. The journey to the Hollow would take them several hours. Daniels stared out the window, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. Every step he took in this strange world felt like stepping further into the unknown. And now, with Rachel, a woman who had once been his ally and friend, they were entering a different kind of danger. Rachel had always been brilliant, but that brilliance came with a price. She had always been ahead of her time, but that had caused her to drift into dangerous territory. No one knew what she'd been working on since she'd disappeared, but Daniels was about to find out. Adams glanced at him as they merged onto the highway. You think she'll actually help us? I don't know, Daniels replied quietly. But we don't have much choice. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. Neither of them spoke again, the tension mounting with every mile. The hollow was close now, and the unknown was waiting for them there. Daniels could feel it in his bones. Everything was about to change. The drive to the hollow took longer than Daniels had anticipated. The night stretched on, the only sound the hum of the tires on the road and the occasional groan of the cruiser as it hit a bump. The further they traveled from the city, the quieter it became. The air seemed heavier, more oppressive, as though the world was closing in around them. Adams hadn't said much since they left Oll's place. His eyes were fixed on the road, his grip tight on the steering wheel. But Daniels could sense the questions that were building inside him. They both knew that finding Rachel wasn't going to be a simple task, and the weight of what they were chasing now, this man, Elias Blackwell, and the mysterious technology he was wielding, was only getting heavier with every mile. Daniel stayed out the window, watching the dark landscape blur by. The silence between them was thick, uncomfortable. He could feel his heart pounding, and no matter how much he tried to focus, his mind kept drifting back to Blackwell. What was his connection to Rachel? Why had Blackwell targeted him? And why had he used that strange device that seemed capable of bending time? Do you really think she'll help us? Adams's voice broke through the quiet, his tone almost hesitant. Daniel shifted in his seat, trying to find the right words. He had no answers, not really. But he knew Rachel. Or at least, he used to. She wasn't the type to turn her back when things were this dire. Or, at least, he hoped she wasn't. I think she'll have to, Daniels said, his voice low. Whatever she's working on, it's connected to this. And right now, she's our only shot. Adams nodded, but Daniels could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't wrong to question it. Rachel had been different when they last worked together. It wasn't just the brilliance. There was an intensity to her, a focus that pushed her beyond what was ethical or even safe. She'd gotten too close to something dark, and when Daniels had tried to pull her back, she'd pulled away. It had been the right thing for her to leave, back then. But now, he wasn't sure if bringing her into this would make things better or worse. As they turned down a narrow road, surrounded by thick trees, Adams slowed the car. The headlights illuminated the darkness ahead, but there was nothing to see, just the dense forest swallowing them up. The Hollow was a small, isolated town, tucked away from the world. Few people had heard of it, fewer still had ever been there. It was the kind of place where secrets were kept, and where people went to disappear. After several more minutes of driving, the road opened up into a clearing. The town came into view, a collection of weathered buildings surrounded by a few scattered homes, barely illuminated by the occasional street lamp. There was something eerie about it, like it was frozen in time, untouched by the hustle of modern life. Daniels felt a shiver run down his spine as Adams slowed the car, looking for a place to park. "We're here," Adams said, turning the engine off. Daniels didn't respond immediately. He just stayed out the window at the town, wondering how much had changed since Rachel had been here. The place felt off, like a place where you could lose yourself and never be found. "Where do we start?" Adams asked, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill. Daniels exhaled slowly, thinking, "She's probably got a hideout nearby. We need to find someone who knows where she's staying. There's got to be someone here who still remembers her." They climbed out of the car and stepped into the cool night. The air smelled faintly of pine, and the quiet of the town was unnerving. As they moved toward the center of town, Daniels's mind raced. He hadn't spoken to Rachel in years. No matter how much he wanted to reach out, something had always kept him from doing it. But now, with everything that had happened, there was no time for regrets. They approached a small bar on the corner of the main street. The neon sign flickered above the door, its light casting a pale glow across the cracked sidewalk. Daniels hesitated before pushing the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco and old beer. The few patrons seated at the bar didn't even glance up as the door swung open. The bartender, a grizzled man in his mid-50s, wiped down a glass with a rag, his face hardened by years of living in a place like this. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Daniels nodded. "We're looking for someone. Rachel Thompson. You know where we can find her?" The bartender paused, his eyes flicking up from the glass, studying Daniels and Adams for a moment. He set the glass down and leaned over the counter. "You sure you want to find her?" he asked, his voice low. "People don't come looking for Rachel unless they've got something real serious on their minds." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. "We need to talk to her. It's urgent." The bartender didn't reply immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the back of the bar, where a dim light flickered under a doorway leading to the rear rooms. After a long pause, he wiped his hands on his apron and spoke again. "Last I heard, she was staying at the old motel on the edge of town. But you'd best be careful. Rachel's not the same person she was last time you saw her. Something's changed in her, and I wouldn't go poking around unless you're ready for it." Daniels felt a tightening in his chest. Something had changed in Rachel. He didn't need the bartender to tell him that. He'd seen the same warning signs in her eyes when she'd left. But now, it wasn't just Rachel they were dealing with. It was everything that came with her. "Thanks," Adams said quietly, turning toward the door. "We'll be careful." The bartender gave a small nod, but didn't say anything else as they exited the bar. The night air hit them like a cold slap as they made their way back to the car. "I don't like this," Adams muttered, his eyes scanning the street. "I don't either," Daniels replied, his jaw tightening. "But we don't have a choice." They climbed into the cruiser and headed for the motel. The engines hummed the only sound as they drove through the quiet streets of the Hollow. Daniels's thoughts kept turning back to Blackwell, the man who seemed to be at the heart of everything. But more than that, his mind kept returning to Rachel. What had she gotten involved in? And why had she vanished? The motel came into view, a rundown building with flickering lights and peeling paint. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. As they pulled into the parking lot, Daniels felt a sudden sense of foreboding. This place, this town, had its own secrets, and Rachel, somewhere in its shadows, was holding the key to all of them. They parked the car and got out, walking toward the motel entrance. The door creaked as Daniels pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit, the floors worn and scuffed. There was a faint smell of mildew in the air. They moved down the narrow hall, looking for any sign of Rachel. But as they reached the end, a door opened, and a figure stepped into the light. It was her. Rachel Thompson, older but unmistakable, stood there, her expression unreadable, her eyes sharp as ever. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. Rachel Thompson stood there in the dim hallway, her figure almost ghostly against the faded wallpaper and cracked tiles. The years had not been kind to her. There was a hardness to her now, a sharpness in her gaze that wasn't there before. She had always been intense, but this was different. She looked like someone who had seen things that broke people, who had walked through darkness and come out the other side changed. Daniels felt a sudden rush of emotions, a mix of relief and tension. Seeing her again brought back memories of their time together, of working side by side, of those moments when they trusted each other with their lives. But now, there was something unspoken between them, a chasm of time and distance that neither of them had bridged. "Rachel," Daniels said softly, his voice laced with 1,000 unsaid words. "We need your help." Rachel's eyes flicked over him, and then to Adams, standing beside him, his hand hovering near his holster. She seemed unfazed by their presence, as though she had expected them both to show up at her doorstep eventually. The silence between them stretched longer than Daniels cared for, and in the end, it was Rachel who broke it. "You always were persistent, Daniels," she said, her voice quiet. But there was a hardness to it now, like it had been tempered by something much stronger than the girl he once knew. "But I didn't think you'd come all the way here, not after everything." "I'm here because we have no choice," Daniels replied, his jaw tightening. "We need to know what you've been working on. It's bigger than you or me, and it's not going to stop unless we figure it out." Rachel's expression flickered, just for a second, before she turned and motioned for them to follow her into the motel room. The smell of stale air and burnt coffee greeted them as they stepped inside. The room was sparse, nothing more than a few pieces of furniture, a desk cluttered with papers, and a single lamp casting weak light onto the worn carpet. She didn't offer them a seat. Instead, she walked to the desk, pulling out a laptop and turning it on. The software of the computer filled the room as it booted up. "You think I'm some kind of magician who can solve all your problems?" Rachel asked, her voice sharp, though there was a weariness beneath it. "What you don't understand is that this thing you're chasing, it's not just some tech. It's not just Blackwell. It's a whole damn system, and I've spent the last few years trying to pull it apart, piece by piece." Daniel stepped forward, his gaze fixed on her. "Then help us. We don't have much time. Blackwell has something that could change everything. People's lives are at stake." Rachel clicked on the laptop, pulling up a series of encrypted files. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with an ease that made it clear she had mastered this world of codes and hidden data. But Daniel saw something else in her movements, a frustration, an urgency. Whatever she had uncovered, it wasn't something she wanted to share easily. "What is this?" Adams asked, his voice low. Rachel didn't look up. "This is what Blackwell has been trying to hide. But it's not just about him. It's about a group, a faction, a shadow organization that operates behind every major government agency. They're the ones who created Blackwell's technology." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, they created it?" She looked up finally, her eyes locking onto his. "I don't mean they funded it or gave him access to it. I mean they invented it. They've been experimenting with time manipulation, with data control, with everything. Blackwell isn't just a rogue agent. He's a prototype, an experiment gone wrong." Daniels felt the weight of her words sink into his chest. He had known that Blackwell was dangerous, but he hadn't realized the full extent of it. The thought that Blackwell was just one of many, just a test subject in a larger, more sinister game, made his stomach turn. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper, as if the very nature of the information she was sharing could get them all killed. And now they are trying to weaponize it, to control it. And Blackwell is gone rogue because he wants it for himself. But what he doesn't realize is that he's just a pawn in a much bigger game. Daniel struggled to keep his emotions in check. "What game? What are they after?" She didn't answer immediately, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. "The system they've built can alter history, Daniels. They can change events, manipulate outcomes, erase mistakes. Imagine having the power to change the past, to make it how you want. They're not just controlling technology, they're controlling reality." The implications of her words were too much to process all at once. Daniels felt dizzy, the room spinning as the reality of what Rachel was saying began to sink in. Time manipulation, control of reality itself. It was too much. "You're telling me they can rewrite history?" Adams asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Rachel nodded slowly. "That's what this is about. Blackwell has a piece of the system. He doesn't even know how dangerous it is yet. But if he activates it, if he unlocks it completely, he'll have the ability to change everything." Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just about stopping a dangerous man anymore. This was about stopping a world-altering weapon from falling into the wrong hands. And if Blackwell succeeded, there would be no going back. "So, what do we do?" Daniels asked, his voice hoarse. Rachel turned back to her laptop, pulling up a series of schematics. "We stop him, before he can use it. I've been working on a countermeasure, a way to neutralize the system before it gets fully activated. But we have to find him, and we have to find out where he's hiding it. That device he's wearing, it's not just a gadget. It's the key to unlocking everything." Daniel's eyes flicked to the screen, where a map of the city appeared. There were several locations marked in red, but one stood out above the rest. It was a building in the heart of downtown, a place Daniels had passed countless times but had never thought twice about. "That's where he's keeping it," Rachel said, her voice grim. "We don't have much time." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. "Then let's go. We stop Blackwell before he can finish what he started." Rachel hesitated, her eyes briefly flickering with something else, something darker, more conflicted. "Be careful, Daniels. This isn't just about taking down one man. It's about destroying a system that's been built to last. Daniels met her gaze, determination hardening in his chest. Then we'll destroy it. Together. With that, they headed for the door. But as they stepped out into the night, something else gnawed at Daniels. Something in Rachel's eyes that hinted she might be hiding something. But now wasn't the time for questions. Now, they had a world to save. The night air was cold as Daniels and Adams followed Rachel down the dimly lit motel hallway, their steps echoing in the silence. The urgency of their mission had settled in, but a gnawing unease tugged at Daniels. Rachel had always been a brilliant mind, but there was something about the way she'd spoken, something off about her mannerisms tonight. It wasn't just the past catching up with them. There was a distance in her eyes, a wall she was carefully keeping up. Daniels had always known her to be fiercely independent, but tonight she felt like a different person entirely. As they approached the parking lot, Rachel took a breath, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Her face was illuminated by the dim street lights, but it was her eyes that spoke volumes, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that seemed weighed down by secrets. "You sure you're up for this?" Daniels asked, his voice low, trying to gauge where her mind was. Rachel didn't meet his gaze immediately. Instead, she looked out toward the distant city lights, her expression unreadable. "I didn't come here to be some damn hero, Daniels. I came because it's the only choice we have left. You think Blackwell is the only problem? Is just a symptom of a much larger disease. We don't have time for philosophical speeches," Adams snapped, frustration lining his voice. "We need to stop him. Now." Rachel finally turned to face them, her eyes steely with resolve. "I know what's at stake, but don't think this is going to be easy. We're walking into something that no one has ever fully understood. And once we're in, there's no guarantee we'll get out." Daniels didn't have time to respond. He could feel the weight of her words, but there was no turning back. Blackwell was still out there, and whatever he was planning had to be stopped before it spiraled out of control. "We've got the location," Daniels said, his voice steady, "and we're running out of time. We need to act fast." They all climbed into the car, and Rachel gave Adams the directions to the downtown building. It wasn't far, but the closer they got, the more Daniels could feel his heartbeat quicken. Something wasn't right. They were heading into the lion's den, and every instinct in him was screaming to turn back, to run, to find another way. But there was no other way. The city streets blurred by as Adams drove in tense silence. Daniels stayed out the window, watching the buildings pass in the dark. Every passing second felt heavier, the weight of the moment closing in on him. He had never felt so powerless. They were racing against something they couldn't fully understand. Elias Blackwell had more than just a device. He had the power to change history, to change everything they knew. As they reached the heart of downtown, the buildings grew taller, and the streets became more congested. They turned into an alley, parking a few blocks away from the target building. Daniels could feel his adrenaline spiking now. He was on the verge of something, but he wasn't sure if it would be a victory or the beginning of something wise. They gathered their gear, a mix of handguns, flashlights, and anything else they might need. Rachel was oddly calm, almost detached, as she checked her own set of equipment. She had always been prepared, but tonight, her movements felt too deliberate, too practiced. "Stay close," Rachel said quietly, her voice flat. "And don't make a sound unless you want to get caught. This isn't a place for mistakes." Daniels nodded, the words hanging heavy between them. Adams was already at the door, ready to lead the way. They moved quickly but quietly, slipping through the shadows, weaving between parked cars and alleyways. Rachel took the lead, her footsteps barely making a sound on the pavement. The building loomed ahead, a monolith in the dark, its windows dark and unwelcoming. They stopped just short of the building's entrance. Rachel glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Daniels's. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like she was saying goodbye. But before he could ask, she gave a sharp nod and moved forward, her hand resting on the door's cold handle. The door creaked open, just enough to slip inside without alerting anyone. They moved quickly, staying low, following Rachel through the dark hallways of the building. The air inside was thick with dust, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance. They passed through a series of corridors, eventually reaching an elevator at the end of the hallway. Rachel hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the button. She didn't seem eager to enter the elevator, but Daniels didn't question it. They had no choice. Going up, Rachel muttered under her breath, hitting the button to send the elevator to the top floor. As they ascended, Daniels couldn't help but feel a tightness in his chest. They were close now, too close. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, revealing a dimly lit hallway. It felt like they were walking into a tomb. Every instinct in Daniels screamed to turn back, to leave before it was too late. But Rachel was already stepping out, her eyes scanning the hallway like she knew exactly where they were headed. They didn't speak as they moved down the hall, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. They came to a set of heavy metal doors at the end, and Rachel stopped, pulling a small device from her pocket. She pressed a few buttons, and the doors clicked open. Daniels felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as they stepped inside. The room was a far cry from what he'd expected. It wasn't a control center or lab. It was something else entirely, a high-tech vault filled with intricate machinery and rows of servers that hummed with silent power. The walls were lined with monitors, their screens flickering with cryptic data. And at the center of the room was a large, cylindrical device. Daniels could feel its presence even before he saw it. It was the key, the heart of everything. Rachel stepped toward it, her expression unreadable. "That's it," she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of something darker. "The device Blackwell's been using. And if we don't stop him, it's only a matter of time before it's activated. Once it is, it's over." Daniels took a deep breath, forcing his thoughts into focus. The device was there, just ahead, but he could already feel the tension building. Something wasn't right. They were walking straight into a trap. As he took a step forward, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway behind them. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the dim hallway, sharp and deliberate, a cold warning that froze the air around them. Daniels's heart leaped into his throat, and he immediately motioned for everyone to stop. Rachel's face hardened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the room. She didn't seem surprised, but there was something in her posture that made Daniels realize she knew exactly what was coming. "Blackwell," she muttered under her breath, almost as if speaking his name triggered something inside her. She moved swiftly, her steps calculated, as she approached the central device, a massive, gleaming cylinder filled with wires and panels, pulsating with energy that seemed to vibrate the air around them. Daniels's hand hovered over his sidearm, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. There was too much unknown in the air, too many variables. "Stay low," Rachel whispered, pulling out a small device from her pocket and pressing it against the surface of the cylinder. Her eyes flicked back to Daniels. "I can hack into it, but it's going to take a minute. We don't have much time." Adams was already moving into position, his gun drawn, scanning every corner of the room. His eyes flicked to the doorway where the footsteps were growing louder. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "Daniels, we need to move," Adams said, his voice urgent. "If we don't act fast, they'll lock us in here. We'll be sitting ducks." Daniels shot him a look, trying to weigh their options. They were in a fortified, high-tech facility, facing an unknown enemy with a weapon capable of altering reality itself. He didn't like the odds. "Rachel," Daniels said, his voice low but firm, "is there any other way out of here?" She paused for a moment, her fingers still flying over the device. "There's an emergency exit, but it's on the other side of the building. And unless you want to be surrounded, I wouldn't suggest going out that way." Footsteps, now unmistakably heavy and purposeful, were closing in fast. Daniels turned to Adams, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. "Cover the door," Daniels ordered. Adams nodded, taking his position near the far wall, his eyes trained on the hallway leading to the door. Daniels stepped closer to Rachel, watching her fingers dance across the small hack device, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm in," she said suddenly, her voice filled with a strange mixture of relief and wariness. "But it's not just a simple lock. This thing is synced to the entire building's security grid. If I try to shut it down, it'll trigger a lockdown. We're trapped either way." "What the hell do you mean?" Daniels asked, his voice rising with frustration. "You're telling me we can't get out?" Rachel's face tightened, and for the first time, he saw the shadow of fear in her eyes. "Not without alerting everyone. The whole building is rigged to respond to this device. We need to make a choice now, Daniels. We can't disable the system without putting us all at risk." The footsteps were almost upon them. Daniels could hear the sound of boots hitting the floor, steady and relentless. There was no time left to debate. Blackwell's men were closing in, and they had no clear way out. Suddenly, the doors at the far end of the room swung open with a deafening screech. A figure stepped through, tall and imposing, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. The figure moved forward slowly, deliberately, his steps measured. Daniels' breath caught in his throat as he recognized the man. It was Blackwell. "Thought you could stop me." Blackwell's voice was low, dripping with disdain. His eyes were cold, calculating, and he was completely unfazed by the presence of the three of them. He didn't even flinch when he saw Adams's weapon trained on him. "You've been chasing shadows, Daniels. It's already too late." Daniels didn't back down. "This ends now, Blackwell. We're taking that device, and we're shutting you down." Blackwell smirked, stepping closer. "You think you can stop me? You can barely understand what's at stake. You have no idea what this device can do, and you certainly don't know what I've planned for it." Rachel's fingers were still working at the hack device, but her face was strained, her eyes flickering between the device and Blackwell. "You don't understand, Daniels," she said suddenly, her voice edged with a desperation Daniels hadn't expected. "This isn't just about stopping Blackwell. The device is beyond anything we've ever seen. I've been trying to break into it for years. If Blackwell activates it fully, it won't just alter history, it'll erase it. Entire events, entire lives could be rewritten. You'll never even know it happened." Daniels' chest tightened. "What do you mean, erase it?" Rachel didn't have time to answer. Blackwell's voice interrupted her, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You're out of your depth, Rachel," Blackwell said, his tone laced with mocking amusement. "You thought you were clever, didn't you? Hacking, probing, thinking you could control what's beyond human comprehension. You were wrong. All of you are wrong." Daniels stood tall, trying to keep his composure as Blackwell's icy gaze locked onto him. "We're stopping you tonight, Blackwell. No more games." Blackwell's smirk faded as he shifted his weight, his hands slowly reaching into his jacket. But then, with the suddenness of a whip crack, Blackwell moved. He was faster than Daniels had ever anticipated, his hand flashing out to grab the device from Rachel's grasp. "No!" Rachel shouted, but Blackwell's grip was ironclad as he ripped the device from her hands. Daniels reacted instantly, drawing his weapon and lunging forward, but Blackwell was already a step ahead. With a wave of his hand, there was a blinding flash of light. Time seemed to slow as Daniels' surroundings morphed in an instant. The walls seemed to pulse and bend, the floor beneath his feet warping like liquid. The entire room flickered, and then, for one brief, terrifying second, everything disappeared. Daniel stumbled, his breath caught in his throat. The entire world had shifted, and he had no idea where or when he was anymore. And then Blackwell's voice, colder than ever, cut through the distortion. "Welcome to the real game, Daniels. Now, let's see if you can keep up." Daniels' head spun, and for a moment, he wasn't sure where he was. The world around him had shifted, twisted in ways that defied every law of physics he'd ever known. He could still feel the floor beneath his feet, but the walls, they were no longer solid, no longer real. The edges of the room were blurring, fading, shifting. Time itself seemed to be suspended, disjointed. And then he heard it, Blackwell's voice, cold and calm, like an ice storm moving in. "You see, Daniels, this is what I've been working for. This is what happens when you play with power you can't control." Daniels blinked rapidly, trying to clear the disorientation. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stand tall. The gun in his hand felt heavy. He tried to move, but it was like walking through molasses. Every step felt like it was taking forever, and yet the distance from Blackwell, standing at the far end of the room, didn't seem to change. "What did you do?" Daniels gritted out. His voice felt hollow, like it was coming from somewhere distant. Blackwell's smirk was almost audible. I've opened the door, Daniels. The device was just the key. Now I've unlocked what's truly possible. I've erased the timeline, just a little. A single moment in time, gone forever. And now, his voice trailed off as he moved, the space warping around him with each step. Daniels's head pulsed with a deep, pounding ache. He knew something had happened. He knew he was no longer in control of this reality, that something far worse was unfolding. But what? What exactly had Blackwell done? Rachel's voice, frantic, cut through the disorienting swirl of lights and shadows. Daniels, get a grip. This isn't real, not like you think. He turned toward her voice, his eyes struggling to find her in the shifting landscape. She appeared, blurry at first, then solidifying before his eyes. Rachel, he asked hoarsely, reaching for her, but the ground beneath them shifted again, pulling them apart. The space between them widened, and the pain in Daniels's chest deepened, a sickening realization dawning on him. Rachel was fading. She was being erased, pulled away by whatever Blackwell had done. Rachel! Daniel screamed, but it was no use. Her form shimmered, flickered like a dying signal, before disappearing entirely. He stumbled, his knees buckling as he tried to comprehend the loss. The world was bending, warping around him, and it wasn't just Rachel. The entire room seemed unstable, as if time itself was crumbling under the weight of Blackwell's actions. Do you understand now, Daniels? Blackwell's voice came again, closer this time. Every time I make a change, it erases what was there. People, places, memories. All of it disappears. One single thought, one moment shifted, and it's gone. Daniels's eyes widened in horror. You can't be serious. Oh, but I am, Blackwell said, stepping closer. His shadow stretched unnaturally, the air around him shimmering with a strange energy. You think you're fighting me, but you're fighting something far more powerful. I don't need to erase the entire world, Daniels. I just need to erase enough to get what I want. Daniels tried to gather his thoughts, tried to cling to something that made sense, but there was nothing stable left. The world was unraveling before his eyes, and every attempt to move forward felt like he was being pulled back into the chaos. What is it you want? Daniels forced the words out, though they tasted like ash on his tongue. Blackwell's eyes gleamed with something darker, more dangerous. You still don't get it, do you? It's not about power. It's about control. I've been working with the system that built the device. They thought I was their tool, but they didn't realize I was the one who had the key all along. I've rewritten the past, Daniels. It's not about what's happening now. It's about what never happened. The future will bend to my will. Daniels shook his head, trying to ignore the vertigo twisting his stomach. He couldn't make sense of it all. Blackwell wasn't just some rogue agent. He was something else, something far worse. A man who could manipulate time itself. Stop it! Daniel shouted, raising his gun. But as his fingers tightened around the trigger, the room around him seemed to flicker again. Blackwell's figure shifted and changed, becoming something unrecognizable, an illusion, a mirage. You can't stop me, Blackwell said, his voice echoing from all directions at once. You're already lost. You're trapped in a moment that never existed. Daniels's gun felt like it weighed a ton, his arms too heavy to lift it. He tried to focus, tried to hold on to something, anything, but the world continued to disintegrate around him. It was like he was caught in a loop, a moment frozen in time, yet slipping through his fingers like sand. Suddenly, a sharp, familiar sound cut through the confusion, the sound of static, then a voice. Daniels, wake up! Wake up! Daniels blinked, shaking his head. The voice, Adams. His heart skipped. Was this real? Was he back in the real world? Daniels, come on. We don't have time. The world around him shifted once again, this time faster, more violently. He was back in the room with Rachel and Blackwell, but it wasn't the same. Blackwell was no longer in front of him. The device was still there, but the air around it was heavy with tension. Adams stood beside him, urgently pulling him back to reality. Get your head in the game. We're not done yet. Daniels shook himself, forcing his mind to focus. His body was drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. The world around him was still unstable, but the flickering had slowed. I don't know what's happening, Daniels gasped, his voice trembling. Adams gripped his shoulder. You're fighting something bigger than you think. Whatever Blackwell did is tearing at the fabric of time. But it's not too late. We can still fix this. Daniels' eyes narrowed. How? How do we fix it? Adams looked toward Rachel, still standing by the device. Her eyes locked on him with a knowing look. We stop Blackwell. We have to stop him. Daniels took a deep breath. Time, reality, it didn't matter anymore. They had a single shot. He had to fight to keep it together. For himself, for the world, for everyone he loved who might be lost if they didn't stop Blackwell's madness. Rachel's voice broke through his thoughts. It's now or never, Daniels. You have to make your choice. Daniels steadied himself, took one last breath, and moved forward. It was time to face Blackwell. It was time to end this. The room seemed to bend around Daniels as he stepped forward, trying to steady his breath. The flickers in the air, the warping of reality, had slowed but still hung like a threatening storm cloud overhead. Every part of him screamed to escape, to get away from the chaos, but there was nowhere to run. The battle wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the very fabric of time itself. Adams was at his side, watching him with a mixture of weariness and hope. There was a tension between them, a silent understanding. Blackwell had already begun rewriting the world, and now it was up to them to make sure it didn't disappear entirely. Rachel stood near the device, her hands trembling slightly, but her face set with determination. Daniels could see it in her eyes. She knew how dangerous this was. She was the only one who understood the full scope of Blackwell's power, and the fear in her gaze was the first honest emotion he had seen from her since they had arrived. You ready? Daniels asked, keeping his voice steady as he moved to her side. Rachel didn't immediately answer. Instead, she glanced back at the device. Her fingers hovered over the glowing panel, but it was clear that she was hesitating, not because she lacked the courage, but because she knew the risks of what they were about to do. Stopping Blackwell was no small task. It wasn't just about taking down one man. It was about stopping the machine that controlled reality itself. I'm ready, Rachel finally said, her voice low and determined. We have one shot at this. If we fail, everything could unravel. Daniels' stomach tightened at the thought. Failure wasn't an option, but neither was rushing in blindly. They had to outthink Blackwell, outmaneuver him, and somehow stop this madness before it consumed them all. Okay, Daniels said, his voice steady. Adams, cover us. If Blackwell shows up. He'll show up, Adams interrupted, his gun already raised, eyes scanning every corner of the room. But I'll be ready. Daniels nodded, grateful for Adams's unwavering resolve. Then he turned back to Rachel. We need to overload the system. We can't just deactivate it, Rachel said, her fingers flying across the interface as she spoke. Blackwell's reset is still in motion, but I can disrupt it. It's going to take all of us. Daniels swallowed, looking around the room, unsure of how much time they had left. How do we do this? Rachel paused for a second, taking a deep breath before continuing. We'll need to trigger a feedback loop in the device. The system will try to correct itself, trying to stabilize reality, but it'll hit a point where it can't. It'll collapse. And if we do it wrong? Daniels asked, his stomach tightening. We won't do it wrong, Rachel said with a cold certainty that made Daniels pause. I'll make sure of it. Before Daniels could respond, a loud crash came from behind them. The door at the far end of the room exploded inward, sending debris scattering across the floor. Blackwell strode in, his figure almost glowing in the midst of the shifting air. His expression was one of quiet amusement, as though he were watching a game unfold, waiting for the final play. You really think you can stop me? Blackwell asked, his voice like ice. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Daniels and Rachel. You can't even comprehend the forces you're dealing with. Daniels' grip on his gun tightened. We'll stop you, he said, his voice resolute. No matter what it takes. Blackwell raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a cruel smile. You don't understand. I've already won. The device is already altering time, bending it to my will. This world, your world, it doesn't matter anymore. It's mine to reshape. Rachel's fingers hovered over the device. Not if I can help it. Blackwell took another step toward them, and the air seemed to warp again, the light around him flickering. You're too late. You can't reverse what's already been done. The timeline has been altered, and once I fully activate the device, I'll have control over everything. I can erase the mistakes, rebuild this world however I see fit. I've got news for you, Rachel said, her voice steady but full of resolve. You won't get the chance. Before Blackwell could respond, Rachel slammed her palm onto the device, sending a burst of energy into the air. The hum of the machine grew louder, the light from the panel flashing in rapid succession. No! Blackwell shouted, his eyes widening with sudden realization. He rushed toward them, but Daniels was faster. In one fluid motion, he reached out and grabbed Blackwell, pulling him back. The world around them seemed to shimmer and warp, the edges of reality rippling like water. Daniels' head spun with the pressure of everything shifting at once. But he didn't let go of Blackwell, pushing him to the ground as the device began to pulse uncontrollably, its light intensifying with every passing second. Stop it! Blackwell growled, his hands grasping at Daniels' arm in a futile attempt to break free. You don't know what you're doing. Neither do you, Daniels said through gritted teeth. You thought you could control this, but you're just a pawn in a game that's bigger than both of us. Rachel's voice rang out above the chaos. Daniels, we're almost there. Just hold him down a little longer. With all his strength, Daniels shoved Blackwell back down as the machine reached its peak, the energy inside it building to an overwhelming crescendo. The light from the device was blinding now, flickering between the impossible and the real. Then, everything went white. For a split second, Daniels felt like he was falling, weightless. Time itself seemed to stretch and collapse, and then, with an almost deafening silence, it all stopped. When Daniels opened his eyes, he was no longer in the room with the device. The world around him was still. No shifting lights, no bending walls. He could feel the solid ground beneath his feet. It was as if the fabric of reality had returned to normal. He looked around. Rachel stood next to him, her face pale but focused. Blackwell was on the ground, unconscious, his body twitching slightly. The device was gone. The room was empty. The world was still. For a moment, Daniels thought he had imagined everything. The warping of time, the destruction of reality. But when he looked around, he realized something had changed. The timeline had been reset. Time itself was stable again, but the cost had been high. Daniels' breath caught in his throat as he realized what had just happened. They had won, but the fight wasn't over. There would be consequences. But for now, they had stopped Blackwell and stopped the device from erasing everything. Police tried to arrest Black undercover CIA agent. Minutes later, unexpected twist shocks everyone. Is it over? Adams's voice came from behind them, his hand still on his weapon, his eyes searching the room. Daniels nodded, though the weight of everything still hung heavy on his chest. For now. But it's not the end. Not yet. Rachel exhaled slowly, looking at the spot where the device had been. No, it's just the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Daniels wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a terrible one. The silence in the room was deafening. The world had stopped shifting, the air no longer trembling with the unstable energy of Blackwell's device. But even with the immediate threat neutralized, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that something else was still out of reach. The danger wasn't gone. Not completely. Rachel stood by the spot where the device had been, her gaze fixed on the now empty space. The harsh, artificial light from the ceiling overhead made the room feel cold and unwelcoming. She didn't look up as Daniels approached her, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. She was still processing everything, just like he was. That wasn't just stopping Blackwell, was it? Daniels asked quietly, his voice low and hesitant. Rachel took a deep breath, slowly turning to face him. No, it wasn't, she said, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. That was more than just preventing one man from changing history. We've reset things. We've halted the immediate danger. But what Blackwell was after, what has been working toward, it's not gone. Daniels frowned, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. You're telling me this isn't over? Rachel's eyes flickered with a mixture of frustration and sorrow. No, Blackwell might be down, but the device, it's not just about him. There's a whole system behind this. Blackwell was a piece of a much bigger puzzle, and we've only scratched the surface. Whoever is behind this, they are still out there, and we don't know if they'll try again, or what they'll do next. Daniels ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of everything. The room felt smaller, as though it was closing in on him. So, what do we do now? Rachel turned toward the door, her steps slow and deliberate. We rebuild, but we have to be smarter. We can't let our guard down. We need to find out who else is involved in this. The people Blackwell worked for, the ones who created the system, whoever they are, they won't give up. And if we don't stop them, we might be facing something far worse than what Blackwell almost brought. Adams had been silent up until now. His eyes narrowed in thought as he watched Rachel and Daniels. His hand lowered from his weapon, but the wariness didn't leave his posture. You're telling me we just stopped the start of a much bigger war? Rachel met his gaze, her expression unwavering. Yes, and we can't let that war happen. Not if we want to preserve everything we know. There was a pause in the air, heavy with the weight of what they had done and what they had yet to do. Daniels felt a pit grow in his stomach. They'd barely scraped by, and now they were left with more questions than answers. And somewhere out there, hidden behind layers of secrecy and power, were the people who had orchestrated it all. Then we find them, Daniels said, his voice resolute. We go after the people who started this. Rachel nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. I thought you'd say that. We can't keep running from this, Daniels continued, stepping toward her. We've got to finish what we started. Rachel's eyes flickered with something darker, something Daniels didn't quite understand. She turned away, moving toward the door again, but not without hesitation. She paused for a moment, her back to Daniels. This won't be easy, she said quietly. The world we thought we knew doesn't exist anymore. If we're going to stop them, if we're going to stop what Blackwell started, we have to be prepared for things we can't even imagine yet. Daniels stepped closer, the finality of her words pressing down on him. Then let's get prepared. We stop them. We make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Adam stepped forward, his eyes still scanning the room with a soldier's vigilance. We may have won today, but the real fight is just beginning. We'll need all the help we can get. Daniels nodded, turning his gaze toward the door. I know, and we'll find it, one way or another. As they walked out of the room, the remnants of Blackwell's device behind them, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a storm, one that was only just beginning to gather force. The future was uncertain, and whatever forces had created Blackwell's technology was still out there, lurking in the shadows. But Daniels wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. He'd been in the thick of the chaos long enough to understand that fear didn't help you survive. It was action that mattered now, and he wasn't going to let whatever this was, whatever they were up against, destroy everything he fought to protect. They stepped into the night air, the cool breeze tugging at their clothes as the city loomed ahead. It was a world that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was on the brink of something huge, something world-changing. The reality they knew had shifted, and they were going to make sure it stayed intact, no matter the cost. As they moved forward, Daniels couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They had just averted disaster, but the people who had created Blackwell's device were still out there, and they were watching. This fight was far from over, and in the back of his mind, Daniels knew one thing for certain. It wasn't just about saving the world. It was about saving the future.